(10:30), how are you? You guys showed up in Mass today. You must have heard the rumor that is a true rumor for this past Sunday, for the first time ever in Epic's history, the 12 o'clock was the largest service on a Sunday. So you're trying to get that award back. Chill. Don't be so overachievement. 12's awesome. There's a little less filter at 12, but let's be honest, there's not a lot of filter at 10:30. It is that time of year, and I want to let you know that while we aren't doing a traditional Christmas teaching series here at Epic, the word that we really are focusing around in this series comes out of the Christmas season, especially if you are familiar with church. It's the word Emmanuel, which means God with us. God with us. And for so many of us, we've been in seasons where it is not hard to believe that as a truth. When you feel close to God, when everything success-wise is going your way, sometimes when you're in that season where life is one blessing after another, when you're in a season when you get everything almost at least that you want, it is not hard for someone to come around and say to you, hey, I really want you to know that God is with you. You're like, yeah. Right? Like you've been in those seasons, right? You got the unexpected bonus. She said yes, even though you weren't sure if she would. You were strong in your faith. And in those moments when people rallied around you, if they were to say, hey, I want you to know that God is with you, you're like, I know that. Then there are these other moments. There end up being these other seasons when we wonder, is that still the truth? Because my life isn't going like I thought my life would go. My life isn't going like I thought my hope would go. Like, could we trust that that's true regardless of the circumstances we find ourselves in the midst of? I want to talk about that in the series we are launching today called Still With Us. Still With Us. I want to explore this idea by looking at the life of a guy named Joseph. And again, I want to let you down. It's not the Joseph you know from the Christmas story. It's the other popular Joseph in the scriptures. And Joseph's life is filled with more twists and turns than you would think would be possible for one person's life. And yet, as Joseph journeys throughout his life, what you will see happening is, as he gets into a new stage, the reality of his circumstances seems to always get worse. And even though his circumstances continue to go downhill, we read things like this all throughout his story. I just want to give you a sample. It's not the main text for today, but I just want you to know in Joseph's life, in his story, you're going to see things like this all throughout his life. Genesis 39, 20, and 21, it says simply this: Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. But while Joseph was there in the prison, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So you're just going to see all things like this show up time and time and time again in Joseph's life. So the fact that he has a master means that Joseph is excellent. So he's a slave, but it gets worse. Not only is he a slave, he gets accused of doing something, and his master, Potiphar, puts him into prison. And yet it's there in prison that we read these words: the Lord was with him. Now, it would be easy to believe statements like this: when he broke out of prison, the Lord was with him. It would be easy to believe after 3 years in confinement, once he got out, the Lord was with him. Like, that would not be hard to believe. But what the author is telling us is that in the midst of that, before he was broken out of prison, before he was freed out of prison, the Lord was with him. And it says the Lord showed him kindness. Really? Is that the first word that comes to mind when you're in prison? And he had the Lord's favor while he was in prison. Those are two things most of us would think cannot go together. You see, I want to talk a moment about your theology, my theology, which is simply a belief in how God's working in our lives. And I especially want to talk about our belief or theology around the idea of how God's presence works in our lives. Now, we could get nuanced with this idea. We could do a deep dive and make the whole sermon about it, but here's what it basically looks like. Good in my life equals God is present. Bad in my life equals God is He's absent. So that's just like elementary on the surface, just a way that so many of us think about it. But I want you to think about this idea. If this is true, then it means we never have God with us when we actually need Him most. Like if it's true, then it means we never have God with us when we actually need Him most. But I want to know, what if you and I could get to this place where we live with the constant assumption that whatever our life looks like, God is present with us, and we are holding on to that with all that we have. We hold on to it when we don't feel it. We hold on to it when we don't see it. We hold on to it when it looks like the trajectory of our life is going the very opposite place of what it would be doing if God was present in our lives. What if you and I could begin to have a belief or a faith by which we view all of life through that says, I don't know what God's up to, but I know He's here. I don't know what God's up to, but I know He's working for my good. Like, what if we could do that? I don't know what God's doing, but I know He's at work. I don't know what He's doing, but I know He is here. Well, let's look at how Joseph's journey begins and then see how he ends up at this unimaginable place that we just read about where he's in prison. His journey begins. He has a father named Jacob, and Joseph is Jacob's favorite. And perhaps you have heard of this, even if you've not been in church, but his father Jacob makes him an ornate coat or an ornate robe. Now, this message is not about whether or not you should have favorite children in your house. Guys, we don't, publicly. But if you're trying to be subtle about which child is your favorite, giving that person an ornate robe probably isn't going to do the trick. It's probably not going to help. I mean, it's like, here. And another thing that I read about this ornate robe is that it was probably a long robe, which meant that Joseph wouldn't have been able to do a lot of manual labor in that robe. Anybody else want to invest? You're in San Francisco, you don't do any manual labor, but if we had a yard, I know we would. So Joseph's brothers, they hate him. They despise him. He's got 11 brothers. They hate him. The text says they could not even speak a kind word to him. They couldn't even speak a kind word to him. And I want you to see in Genesis 37, if you'll stand with me, Genesis 37, 5 through 11, I want you to see with this backdrop in mind. He's his father's favorite. Life looks pretty good for Joseph based on what we know. His brothers hate him, but that's okay. And then he has this dream come about, and let's read about it in 37, 5 through 11. Joseph had a dream. And when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. Surprise, surprise. He said to them, listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it. His brothers said to him, do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us? And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. Then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. Listen, he said, I had another dream, and this time the sun and moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me. Anybody ever had that dream where you never want to wake up? Most of us have dreams where we want to wake up quickly, but when he told his father, verse 10, as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, what is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you? His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. You may be seated. Well, you can leave the text open there if you've got it on your phone or with you. Joseph had a dream. And every single one of us knows what it's like to have a dream, don't we? Or maybe a more accurate way to say it, every one of us knows what it was like to have previously had a dream. You see, I don't know what your situation is today. My guess is that some of you are no longer the dreamer types. But even if you don't know presently what it's like to live with a dream, all of us at one time in our lives knew what it was to have a dream of who we would become, a dream of what we would do with our lives, a dream of where we would live. Most of us in this room, I'm guessing, had a dream of being married one day. And then a large percentage of us had a dream of becoming a mom or a dad one day. We had a dream about owning an amazing house. We had a dream about what we would do to make a difference in this world. We had a dream about some beautiful, lifelong friendships. Whoever you are, you know what it's like to live with a dream. And Joseph knew what it was like to live with an actual God-given dream as well. You can imagine for Joseph, life is pretty good. And when you begin to have dreams like this, you believe that life is going to get even better. I mean, we are headed to a position of power, and my brothers that don't like me already, they're going to bow down to me. You can imagine that Joseph surely was excited, as you and I would be, about his future. Some of you can remember the day that you were excited about your future. Now, in a crowd like this, and me knowing so many of your stories, I know some of you are at that place right now, and congrats. Some of you, that place is a past tense, because now you're living a very different future than the one you were excited about, yeah? It's not exactly like you thought it would be. So Joseph, he's got this vision in mind that you and I would have. Oh my gosh, God, are you going to make me in power this week? One day, Joseph's going out to his brothers at a place, or near a place called Dothan, and in verse 18 through 20, here's what happens as Joseph approaches his brothers. But they saw him in the distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. Anybody have a sibling like that? If they're not in the room, you can be honest. Here comes that dreamer, they said to each other. Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say, back to their father, that a ferocious animal devoured him. Cool story if that's how you're going to go, but then we'll see what comes of his dreams. So Joseph is approaching them. They already hate Joseph. Joseph maybe unwisely shared the dream that he had about how one day he would be in power, and these brothers of his would come and they would bow down to Joseph, and they're like, here comes the dreamer now. Let's make sure those dreams never come true. Now, thankfully, they don't kill Joseph. Thankfully, they only decide to sell him to some Midianite merchants, but they go back and they tell Jacob that his favorite son was devoured by a wild animal. So you can imagine how Jacob is feeling, and you can imagine how Joseph is feeling. So he gets sold to some Midianite merchants, but he doesn't just get sold one time. In fact, the last verse in Genesis 37 says this, in verse 36, meanwhile, the Midianites sold Joseph in Egypt to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard. So I just want you to think about what's happened with Joseph's life from the moment he had the dream. So he has the dream, and you can imagine, we don't have to read too much into the text. We know how it works when you have an exciting future. We all know how it works, right? Like, I can't sleep at night. I wonder when this is going to happen. I can't wait for it to happen. So he's in that mindset as God is giving him a series of dreams. 2 are listed. I'm assuming he got more than that. And as he has these visions or the dream that God gives to him, he's excited about what's ahead. And then his brothers hate him, and then they sell him, and then he's in Egypt, and then he goes on to be sold again by the Midianite merchants to Potiphar, who's the captain of Pharaoh's guard. While he's there, God gives him success, gives him favor. He gets the approval of Potiphar. Potiphar says, you can be in charge of my entire house. The only thing that you can't have in my house is my... Everybody understands why that's a good idea. Okay, you can have everything but my wife. But while Potiphar's away, because he trusts Joseph so much, the wife makes advances towards Joseph so that Joseph would be intimate with her. She tries to seduce him, and it doesn't just do this once, but she does this over and over again, and his robe, this coat, ends up being left in her hand, so much so that she accuses Joseph of doing the thing he actually never did. Potiphar doesn't take kindly to this, as you would imagine, so Potiphar puts Joseph into prison. Now imagine you have had those God-given dreams, and all of this other stuff happens to you. What are you thinking? I think what you and I would be thinking, and this is the title of my talk for this morning, this wasn't the dream. Yeah? This wasn't the dream. Being hated by your brothers is not the dream. Your father thinking you've been devoured by a wild animal, not the dream. Unsure if you'll ever see your dad again, not the dream. Being taken away from your homeland, not the not the dream. Being sold to some Midianite merchants isn't the dream. Egypt is not the dream. Being Potiphar's slave, not the dream. And being here in prison after being falsely accused certainly was never the dream. God, this wasn't the dream. Some of you are living in that place right now as I speak. There's something going on in your life, in your work, in your relationships, in your family, in your health, with your finances, and you're just going, this wasn't the dream. Let's be honest. The dream wasn't that you would be divorced. You'd seen divorces even in your own family and with your close friends, but the dream for you is that it would never happen, and that's where you sit today. The dream wasn't that you would be at a doctor's office every other month wondering if it had come back or if you would ever be healthy again. This wasn't the dream. The dream was that you would have lots of kids, but the reality appears to be that you will live your life without any. The dream is that you would move to San Francisco and climb the corporate ladder. You thought it had been promised to you, but the reality is you're closer to entry level than you are to the executive team. The dream wasn't that you would still be single at 35. The dream was that you would launch this company and it would be an overnight success. The reality is it never got off the ground. The dream, guys, let's face it, it was not that you would live most of your life here in San Francisco paralyzed by anxiety and depression. This wasn't the dream. Are you in a space between your dream and the fulfillment of that dream? Now, all of us, I think, are wired the same, which is we get really excited about the dream and we get really excited when it gets fulfilled. Anybody besides me? And we would rather not have all the stuff in between. Joseph is raising his hand with you. If you're like, Joseph, if you could have been king or if you could have been in Pharaoh's court tomorrow, would you have taken it? He's like, yes, I'll go tonight. God had something else in mind. And there's so many places in our life where we're just going like, this was not the dream. This wasn't the dream. Joseph ends up in Egypt for a really long time. He ends up in Egypt for a really long time. Maybe some of you have ended up at a geographical place that you never intended to be, at least for this long. Can I let you in on a secret? As long as you promise not to throw anything at me. You do know that your staff here at Epic Church prays for you guys to get called here long term. That's right. Yep. Don't throw anything at us. We end it with, Lord, not our will, but yours. But here's our will. The reality is we do want that to happen for so many of you. And we've seen it happen for so many of you. The other reality is we want you to live out your God-given purpose wherever that takes you. But are you in a place geographically even where you're like, this was not the dream? For most of us, it's not that we're in a place geographically, it's just that we're at a place in our life we never thought we'd be. There's something present in our life. Maybe it's with our parents, maybe it's with our kids, maybe it's with our industry, maybe it's with our job, maybe it's with the company, maybe it's with our finances, maybe it's with our mental health, and we just know this wasn't the dream. It was not supposed to be like this. Are you at a place in your life that you never thought you would be? And I'm talking to the youngest of you, and I'm talking to the oldest of you. Are you at a place in your life that you never thought you'd be? So many of your stories are coming to my mind, even in this moment, and as I see your faces, and so many of my own stories are coming to my mind. Think about the things that just weren't supposed to happen. You know, I think about, man, I was not supposed to lose my mom at 25. That is not supposed to happen. That was not the dream. After spending a few days with my dad this week, I think, gosh, how much more does he feel that? 16 years later, like, this wasn't the dream. This is not what we set out to do. Where in your life are you just saying, like, this wasn't the dream? This was not the dream. When we end up in a place that we never thought we would be, does that different place cause you to assume that God is nowhere to be found? Does you being in a different place, does it cause you to assume, to interpret that reality? Meaning that another reality is God is nowhere to be found, and if he is here, he's doing something against me. He doesn't appear to be for me. nowhere to be found. Guys, one of the advantages we have with Joseph's story is we get to see the beautiful way it ends, and we will do that throughout the series. We get to see the beautiful way that his story ends. And so we're like, Ben, it was easy for the writer to look back at his life and go, God was with him, God was with him, God was with him. But we're in such distress because we just don't know how our story is going to end. I mean, if we're honest, we would all raise our hands at how many of you have ever been anxious because you just don't know the future? And everybody's got their hand up except for the liars in the room. Like, no, I'm cool. I just trust God all the time. We've got a gold star for you. But we need you to go to a different church because we cannot relate. We cannot relate to you. What causes us such distress is that we just don't know how it's going to end. And some of us, not only do we not know how it's going to end, we don't know how we're going to get through what we're in the middle of right now. And just looking at faces, seeing your stories. We've got people been affected by fires. People been affected by spouses walking out on them. We have people who are kids and their parents want nothing to do with them. And then there are parents that I know in this room who know that their kids want nothing to do with. Like, it's just all over the place. And I think about Joseph's life, and we do get perspective. But what if we have the same God present with us that he had present with him? What if we don't have to know exactly how God's going to write the end of our story to know that he's worthy of being the author of our story? We've got to start becoming people who live by faith. We're like, no, Ben, I want to see it before I believe it. That isn't faith. It isn't faith. Corinthians, I believe, talks about this idea that we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen, because what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. But we're so fixated, aren't we? Me too. But Ben, you don't understand on the surface, on the surface, on the surface, on the surface. God is working beneath the surface of your life. I don't know what he's up to, but you know very little of what he's up to, but I know he's up to something. I know it didn't start out like you wanted to. I know someone did something to you that they never should have gotten away with, but God will even redeem that. He walked out on you. She left you. God's still writing your story. Still writing your story. So I want to ask you this. What if your setback is actually a setup? What if your setback is actually a setup? What if the thing that you don't know how you'll ever come back from is the thing God's going to use to get you to your Egypt? Guys, one of the things that I would love to be able to tell you something different on, but I can't. I've got to tell you what's the cumulative truth of Scripture when it comes to dreams. The way it typically works is there's a lot of time that goes by between the dream and its fulfillment. This is not the part of the message that's going to be encouraging, okay? Not that you guys talk back anyway. But if you were talking back, this is not the time to say, preach it, Ben, give us more. Abraham was 75 years old when God told him that he was going to become a father to many nations. And he and Sarah, they held on for a while, but then they weren't so sure. But it was 25 years later before Isaac comes onto the scene. Last week, Will did a great job teaching us out of Jeremiah 29, some of your favorite Bible verse, right? Like, I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you, not to harm you, plans to give you hope and to give you a future. And God's like, here's the dream. I'm going to bring you guys out of your exile in Babylon. Here's the dream. And they were like, okay, let's unpack the bags. We're just about to go home. Certainly by the end of this weekend, we're going home. And God's like, it's going to be 70 years. It's going to be 70 years. Even for Joseph, 17 when he had the dream, 30 when it was fulfilled. We think 13 days is a long time. If the options are 13 years, 25 years, or 70 years, I'll take 13. Even this prophecy from Isaiah in 7:14, Isaiah says this, where we get this word Emmanuel. It's right there in the text. He says, therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son and will call him Emmanuel, right? Beautiful dream for the people of God, the nation of Israel. Everybody understands this is a good thing for this. So they're like, yes! And they're on edge. When will it happen? Will it be this year? Will it be in the spring? Oh, is it going to be this time next year? Guys, 700 years between the dream and Jesus coming onto the scene. But was he faithful? Yes, he didn't bow out on his dream. It just looked different than what they wanted it to look. Galatians 4 would tell us when the fullness of time had come, when it was the right time, not the right time in our mind, but it happens when it's the right time in his mind, he breaks forth. And he brings it. He gives us what we could never have on our on. Don't walk away from your dream just because it hasn't been fulfilled yet. The difference between people who see the fulfillment of their dream and the people who don't, you need to understand this. It's not just that they're a bigger dreamer than you are. It's that when things got hard, because things always get hard, they didn't bow out, they leaned in. They didn't walk away. Guys, if we don't develop this word perseverance, the meaning of the word is simply staying power. If you don't have staying power, you will not hold out till your dream becomes what you want it to be. You will not hold out till your marriage becomes what you want it to be. We will not hold out till the future of our church becomes what we want it to be. But when we walk through the valley, we have a God who is present with us and is going to bring us out on the other side according to his time. But we're like, well, I can't see it, must not be it. It's been a couple weeks. Give me my space. Joseph keeps walking with God even when he's in prison. Most of us treat character decisions like I treat a diet when I'm not losing weight, when I'm eating well. If the green stuff isn't causing me to lose weight, I'll just eat the chocolate stuff. Right? Yeah, all of us. So we're like, if God's not going to give it to me today, I don't need to live for him. God, I'll start doing for you when you do for me. Joseph keeps his faith. And he teaches us this principle. You can complain about the present or you can prepare for the future. Keep belly aching. Keep talking about all the problems. Keep talking about what you don't have, what you won't be, what you don't think is possible, and God is still at work in your life. So complain about what is or begin to prepare for what he wants to bring about. In Genesis 39, 20 through 23, I want you to see Joseph doing what most of us would not have done in prison. Joseph's master took him, put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. But while Joseph was there in the prison, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. Listen to this. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. See, some of us don't want to start doing right until we end up in what we think is the right place. Joseph began to develop habits in the prison so that when he was in the palace, he would continue to get that kind of authority and responsibility and leadership. I don't know what desert you're in, but God's wanting to do something in your character while you're in the desert. I'm looking forward to your time of abundance. He wants to bring you into that promised land, whatever that is for you, whatever his dream is for you. But if you bow out before it comes about, it may never come about. Guys, God is sovereign. And if you still have breath in your lungs, he still has a plan and he still has a purpose. And I want to give you 3 scenarios. I don't know which one God will do for you, but I believe each of these 3 is for a number of people in this room. The first one is God might want to birth a new dream in your life in this season. He might want to birth something brand new, which means we don't give him the script and ask for his signature. We'll give him a blank page and go, you show me. God, if you're birthing something new, I don't want to be hanging on to something old. Anybody ever hung on to something old too long? The second thing is God might want to resurrect a dream that you thought had died. I don't know what it is, but he might want to resurrect a dream you thought had died. And here's what's true for some of you, many of us maybe. God wants to show you his dream that's so much bigger and better than the dream you think you're missing out on now. What do you think as Jesus went to the cross and suffered, as people observed that, especially his close followers, what do you think they were thinking? Were they thinking, this is awesome, just like he said? Our sins are going to be forgiven. Wow, he was right. He told us over and over he was coming to die. This is awesome. Do you think they were thinking that? Guys, we have a text. Go read the end of all 4 Gospels. It's crazy. No one that we can tell was thinking that. No one was like, yes, dream. You know what they were thinking? Do you know what they were thinking? It has something to do with the title of this talk. This wasn't the dream. This was not the dream we had for our Messiah. We thought he was the one. When you see Luke 24, they're on the road to Emmaus. The 2 people encounter Jesus. They don't know it's him. And he's like, why are you so down? And they're like, we had hope that he was the one. As Jesus is dying, no one is going, right along the script. And when you're in the valley of your life, none of you probably are going, this is exactly what I was hoping for, but you need to know that the God who raised his son from the dead can raise whatever it looks like it's died in your life. Will you let him? We let him birth something new. Church, will we let him? Listen, this thing's working pretty well here. You know what the temptation is for me? We now have something to lose. I now don't have to exhibit the same kind of faith it took to start this church. No, I will not walk down that path. I am going to stay and go, God, give me a fresh stream. Give us a fresh stream. We want to give ourselves to whatever it is. We are happy and blessed by what you have done. God, we are not discontent. We're content, but we're also hopeful for more. Whatever the dream is in your heart for the next decade of this church and my family and our lives, we want in. And until we see it, we're not going to let go of you. All right, I see 4 of us are excited, so we should shut this down. If you guys can't go crazy for that, hopefully you'll be able to roar a little bit when we have some baptisms in a moment. Here's what we want to do, and I want to tell you why. We're going to give you a chance to be prayed over by our leaders in the back of the room and in the space that's open. There is some open space. There are times for all of us when we're in a season where we need to borrow each other's faith. And rather than feeling guilty about that, you need to understand that's why God created the church. That's why God created the church. And so I'm going to pray, and then as Zach and the team come to lead, you're going to be prayed over. So go ahead and just take a posture of prayer. And you don't have to be overly specific, although you can. Just say to them, I need to believe that what I'm in the midst of right now that wasn't my dream, that God is still present and he's working all things for good. Maybe you need to tell them, hey, I used to have a dream in my heart, but because it didn't happen in 2 or 3 years or even 10 years, I gave up on it. And you need to ask them to pray for you that God would resurrect that dream in you. God, you know what you want to do in each heart, in each life. God, you're asking, I think all of us, what you asked Abraham and what you asked Joseph and what you asked Moses and what you asked Esther and Nehemiah. Will we trust you before we see it? If not, we have zero faith. So God, I pray that you would cause faith to rise up all over our congregation in this epic community. I pray that you would restore what we've given up on. I pray that you would birth new dreams. God, I pray that you would give us that staying power. I pray that you would move throughout this space as we've been asking you to do all week. Even now, Jesus, come. I want to ask you to stand. We have men and women who are ready to pray with you. They're not going to ask you anything, but you can tell them whatever you want. Just say, hey, I just need to pray that God's presence is present. And that he's here, because what I feel like is this, but I want to believe what we've heard today. So let's move and lead us, and then we'll close up and get into those baptisms in a moment.